There is no better way for me to connect with God than when I am alone, when I'm truly alone. And I don't mean being away from people, but also being away from distractions, being away from the day to day grind, the responsibilities, the commitments. Even if it's only for a few hours, right? It doesn't have to be a week long or a month long sojourn or sort of vacation. It could be, even in the most chaotic times and the most chaotic moments of life, just having those few hours to myself, they're so precious. They literally are the moments that I can carve out and be with God and be with the truest form of myself. Now, being alone, I've certainly experienced both sides of the spectrum. Of course, now I'm talking about the joys of solitude and experiencing that peaceful quiet, that peaceful stillness. But there was a time, believe it or not, where I absolutely loathed being alone. I just could not stand it at all. In fact, it would bring me great discomfort and anxiety. I would try to fill that with company, with friends, with activities, with something to just kind of keep my mind constantly engaged and distracted. And I think the reason, and this is probably true for a lot of us, is because I didn't want to explore how uncomfortable I really was. I didn't want to go there, right? I'd rather sort of put a band aid on it. Or as some people say, drink their problems away, you know, drink their distractions away. Be so consumed by this world that maybe you'll forget about the pain. Maybe you'll forget about the emptiness or the yearning for something more. Something that can't be found in friends, something that can't be found in activities, something that can't even be found in thoughts, something that cannot even be found in accomplishments, in gaining things. And this is a lesson that I had to learn the hard way because I thought that happiness and fulfillment and inner peace were a function of getting and receiving. I didn't realize that they were already etched into my being. They were part and parcel of who I am and who I've always been. And so it's a matter of realizing it that took the greatest struggle, that took the greatest journey. But once you're on the other side, once you actually see that, you know what, being alone is not something to fear, it's not something to avoid. Questioning what your life is about is not a meaningless exercise. It's not something that we should just discard. It's the secret to living the best life we can ever live. The most joyful, the most peaceful, the most fulfilling life we can ever live. And this is important, right? Keep in mind that, I'm shooting this video not too long after a pandemic that really shook this entire world and flipped it upside down. A pandemic that forced almost all of us to stay at home, and in many cases to be alone, to not have the luxuries that we were used to before the pandemic. And it lasted for a long time. Of course, there were variances and differences, depending on where you lived and what the specific sort of rules and restrictions were at that time. But I think it's safe to say that almost all of us experienced an extended period of being alone. Now, some of us experienced sort of a spiritual revival. Some of us experienced, like myself, we experienced sort of a yearning for something more. We questioned our lives. We questioned, is this really what we want to be doing? Is the sort of the current trajectory of my life going to bring me fulfillment? and we instituted some changes and developed new habits and ushered in a new way of living and a new way of looking at the world. But there are also many more people, multiples of the other camp, that really struggled during this time, that faced incredible loneliness, faced incredible despair. On top of the medical complications, on top of the logistical and the societal and the personal challenges, there was also the big challenge, I think, of just being lonely, feeling like there's not anyone there. Now, of course, we all had social media, or those of us who log on and use social media, but even then it felt hollow. It felt, as best as social media could do at that time, it still didn't solve a lot of the struggles that many of us were going through. But, I think one of the, if I can call it, the blessings of that experience, or of that period in our lives, is that it really taught us, it forced us, actually, right? It sort of locked us into a room, against our own choice and volition. It locked us into our own room, and it forced us to say, you know what? I need to examine how I'm living my life. I need to examine who I really am. I need to examine my purpose, right? Because, now hindsight, we have the benefit of hindsight. And hopefully for a lot of us, this period was transformational and at least helped spark something. But if it didn't, then I hope that you can take these words into consideration and realize that being alone doesn't have to be something that is insufferable, that is unbearable. There is it's even hard for me to describe, to be honest with you. It's one of those things where you just have to experience and see how beautiful it can actually be. And I know at first it can be very difficult, right? Especially when you're so used to surrounding yourself with distractions, surrounding yourself with people, that it can be very, very hard sometimes to sort of block all that noise out. Because then you have all these thoughts that you're not used to managing, you're not used to navigating. And all of a sudden, in a quiet room, in a house that's feels empty, those voices and those thoughts can sometimes magnify, and it can make you think all sorts of things, and it can make you feel in a terrible spot. But you have to go through the pain. You have to examine it and do so methodically, right? It's not a matter of, I say this often, it's not a matter of willpower. It's not a matter of just trying to sugarcoat the negative, or just always think positive thoughts, think positive thoughts. There's a spiritual layer that needs to be applied to everything that you're thinking, to everything that you're experiencing, so that you can develop the understanding, so that you can raise your awareness and see all of these, thoughts as games, as illusions, as not really the essence of who you are. This is, I think, the blessing of being alone, is because it gives us that ability and that perspective. Even if you're well trained in the art of spirituality, even if you've spent many years immersed in meditation and mindfulness and yoga and connecting with the divine, you will always probably prefer the moments of being alone than you would the moments where you were distracted with people and things and other commitments and responsibilities. Now, that's not to say that you avoid these things, right? Because sometimes we can go the other extreme. We can take the mindset of, okay, these things are bad for me and I want to totally cut myself off from the world. No, the wise person is able to balance both. To have one foot in the physical world and have one foot in the spiritual world. You need both, right? You need both. Sometimes you need more isolation, especially in the beginning, So you can create that space, you can create that breathing room for your mind to slow down, for your soul to wake you up. But then once it has woken up, or once you have traveled this journey enough, then you don't need to, you know, be a recluse. You don't need to, remove yourself from society all the time. You can certainly do so if you wish, but one of the things I always talk about is that if you have something, give it. If you have money, give it to those who need it. If you have time, give it to those who need it. And most importantly at all, if you have some sort of knowledge, some form of wisdom, then make sure to give that. Because more than your dollar and more than your time and more than anything else you can give, one positive word, one piece of insight or instruction can change the entire trajectory of a person's life. And there's ripple effects to that as well. That person can be one step closer towards enlightenment, and they can help 10 other people. And those 10 people can help 100 and 1,000 and so forth. So I really do believe in the importance of giving back, and giving back in anything, but it's, of course, giving back in what we have learned, the challenges that we've gone through, the experiences that we've had. I'm a big believer in stories and what stories can teach us. It's a big reason why, I'm sitting on this YouTube channel creating these videos in the first place, is because I feel like, maybe there is something on my journey that I can share with others. I don't know if all of it's good, but thankfully I've been able to kind of overcome, all the negative thoughts, all the negative self-talk, and just, go for it and see what it does, and have no expectations. And if it helps someone, then all the more better, right? But, if you have that same capability to do so as well. So even if you have developed that understanding, yes, there's a need and a time to be alone, but there's also a time to spend doing the right things with the right people. That's an important sort of thing that we need to be able to distinguish, how we are allocating our time, how we are dedicating our time. But of course, going back to kind of this, being alone in the first place, I think it's important to keep in mind that when you're alone, it's not that it's just you. There's never a situation where it's just you. It's always an opportunity to connect with God. Because you could be alone, but you could also be thinking nonstop. And every time you are thinking, you are not actually with God. God or presence or consciousness is not something that needs to be thought of. It needs to be something that is experienced. Right? When we think of God, we conceptualize an idea or an image of Him. And that image varies depending on who you ask, right? You can line up 10 different people and they can have 10 different images of God. Even one person can have multiple images over time. But we are talking about the unchanging, the eternal essence, the eternal light that is God. Yes, we may have different perceptions, but the true nature of God, the true essence of God, just like our soul, which is a part of God, is unchanging, is eternal. So all these sort of mind-made reflections or interpretations are not going to do it. We have to go one step deeper. We have to go to the step where there is no thought anymore, where there is simply experience, where there is simply that feeling of connection, that feeling of oneness, that feeling of divine union. That's what it means to truly be alone. To be alone, not only of our other people, but to be alone from thoughts so that we can make room for God. It sounds kind of funny when I say it out loud, but it's almost like your time with God is in competition with your time for others. right? Because how many of us can truly say that when we're at work, when we're doing our daily tasks and chores, we're thinking about God and we're talking with God and we're opening up our heart for God? How many of us can truly say that when we're at home and we're doing our homework or spending time with our kids or watching TV, that we're truly thinking about and being with God, right? Everything that you do is taking time, in essence, away from God. Unless, of course, you have the mindfulness or you have the awareness to treat every activity as an opportunity to be with God. But for most of us, that can be very difficult to do in the beginning, which is why I go back to this idea of you need that solitude, you need that space, you need to carve out that time for God. When people say, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that, the truth is they do have time, but it's what they choose to allocate that time towards that makes the difference. And so you have to ask yourself, do you have time for God? Can you make time out of your busy schedule for God? Because the truth is, God is making time for you. It's like that there's this line from Paramahansa Yogananda's lecture where he says, can you imagine if God stopped making time for you? If you, and I'm paraphrasing here, but can you imagine if God stopped keeping you alive? Right? God is giving all the time to us. And realistically speaking, I'm not saying that, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we're always in communion with God. That's just not possible, right? Even for monks and nuns that have sacrificed and given up this worldly life, they still have daily tasks and chores. And it's virtually impossible to live, a 24/7 life completely in union with God. Or at least I think so. I'd love to be proven wrong here. But I think for a lot of us that are watching this, for a lot of us that are trying to grow as spiritual beings, to awaken, I think we just have to realize that it needs to be a little bit more than perhaps what it was before. And that's sort of the bar or the benchmark that we should compare it to. Not how do we get to a point where we're thinking all the time, but just how do we get to a point where it's a little bit more? How do we get to a point where we're carving out a little bit more time for God than we previously were? And in order to do so, we need to be alone. It's better if we're alone. And it doesn't matter exactly what you're doing. Notice that I'm not saying that when you have this time, you need to be doing X, Y, Z. I leave it pretty open because I understand, if it's one thing that you guys have probably learned about me, is that all roads can lead to the same mountain. All roads can lead to the same God, to the same source. So I don't try to limit it. It's not the activity in and of itself that I'm interested in, but what state of mind, what state of being you are in when you do these activities. When you and I say do sort of lightly because, again, it's not a function of doing, but more so a function of being. Trying not to go after everything, but sometimes letting things come to you, letting things be, letting things kind of slowly simmer down so that your awareness can rise up and experience what's already there. Every moment, every moment that is passing by you is a window into awakening. There is no sort of special aha moment. Every moment has the potential to change your life completely. But it's a matter if you treat it that way. It's a matter if you allow for that space to open up. And of course, there's various sort of suggestions and ways that we can try to do this. I mentioned how sometimes it can be very hard in a busy life, but one of the things that I found is if you can't get away, if you can't, because of your responsibilities, maybe you have people that depend on you, maybe you have things that you need to do. If you can't get away, then maybe try to adjust your schedule. Sometimes there's moments in the day where it's less hectic than others. For me, I found, and I don't do this often because, lately I've been, candidly enjoying my sleep a little bit more. But, there are some times where either when I can't sleep or when I intentionally want to stay awake, I find that either, late into the night or very early into the morning before the sun rises, these are absolutely golden moments to be with God because everyone else is asleep. The whole world is asleep. The whole hustle and bustle of doing this and doing that, getting emails and getting text messages and notifications from our social media, all of this is at a pause, is at a standstill. And so, if we're able to be awake at that time, or if we're able to fully engage at that time, then we can certainly connect with God and use that alone time as such a precious opportunity to be with the beloved, to be with the divine. Now, of course, these are just some suggestions, but I hope they at least kind of get your brain thinking about, how can I dedicate more time to being alone? It's such an important part of the spiritual journey. I don't think there's anyone that's truly progressed without spending massive amounts of time of being alone. And I really encourage all of you, no matter how you do it, no matter what you do, if you do anything at all, where you do it, the point of the matter is that to be alone and don't be afraid of being alone. Let whatever experience comes up to come up. And if it's uncomfortable and painful in the beginning, believe me, you're not alone. We all go through that. We all have to fight our own demons. We all have to address what it is that's been boiling up in our past and sort of, creating all the negative self-talk and all the negativity and all sort of the depressive states of mind that we sometimes occupy. We all have to go through that, but the purpose of life is that that's not the end all be all. There's something greater beyond that, and we just have to push through it. There's this quote that I read by Robert Frost lately where it says, the only way out is through. You can't go around it, you can't go under it, you can't go backward, obviously. So the only way to get out of that situation is to go through it, to face your demons, to face whatever it is that is blocking you, to face all the illusions and to dispel them, and to say, you know what, I am not all of this that's been created by my mind. And the mind is a beautiful instrument as long as we know how to harness it wisely. So I'll leave you with that. I know it's certainly a lot to think about, a lot to ponder, but I hope it gets, it starts to percolate. I hope it starts to kind of, get light bulbs going off a little bit. And curious if you have any thoughts on this. Certainly would love to hear them. If you have some time to drop them in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you again for watching. I really appreciate all your time, all your support. Thank you, everyone who has been writing messages and comments and showing your love through various ways, whether that's liking the video or sharing it with a loved one, subscribing to the channel. Believe me, I notice all of these things. No matter how busy I am, I really appreciate it. And from the bottom of my heart, I am very grateful for all of you who allow, this channel to continue and for me to get up here and to talk about these things that I love. But with that, I thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.